Hi there everybody, this is Squish with Squish Tech Industries, and today we're going to be talking about this RPG right here, Conan by Modiphious. Not to be confused, of course, with Conan role-playing game from 1985, or Conan the role-playing game from 2004, or GURPS Conan 1988. When you're searching for this on the internet, you might be tempted to look for Robert E. Howard's Conan, but that's just going to get you a lot of things like source material, original books, other role-playing games, movies even. So what you really want to look for is either the 2d20 Conan, Modiphious Conan, or the mouthful Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of. I think the best way to talk about this book, since it's a little bit different than most well-known RPGs, is to first just sort of explain how it works. The first thing you're going to notice about the game, as well as on the cover, is that this is a 2d20 system. That means you're going to be rolling 2d20 for your ability checks and your attack rolls to make all of your actions happen. Let's say you're playing the legendary barbarian Steve, and you're wanting to move a heavy rock. Let's make this the heavy rock. Just as in most role-playing games, we're going to have to roll some dice in order to check and see if we can move the rock. We start by looking at Steve's brawn. Being a pretty strong guy, Steve's brawn is something around 12. So we're going to settle on 12. In the brawn category, Steve has an athletic skill of 2. Adding them together gets us a 14. And now we know that rolling anything at 14 or below on our 20-sided dice is a success. The rock isn't too big, so your Dungeon Master says it's only a difficulty 1 in order to move. So you only need 1 success. We roll our 2d20 and Steve gets a 7 and a 3, meaning 2 successes, 1 more than we needed. Steve not only moves the rock, but this extra success will turn into something useful we can use later on. More on that later. Now, old Stephen the Barbarian encounters yet another rock in his raging warpath. Steve, the mad lad that he is gonna have to move this new rock even though it is larger and generally more uncooperative to his efforts. Your Dungeon Master says that because of its newfound size and its resistance to your attempts at forceful relocation, this new rock is a difficulty 3, athletics to move. This means that you're going to need 3 successes on your 2d20 in order to successfully move this rock. Looking at your character sheet, you can see something you didn't notice before. Steve the Wayward has something called a focus of 1 in his athletics skill. For us, that means if Steve gets a 1 on his athletics check, not only is it a success for being under 14, as we established earlier, but he gets yet another success for landing on a die under his focus. We hope for good luck and roll. Happy to see a 1 and a 6 this time. With 2 successes for being under the 14 on each dice, and a bonus success for being at or under our focus, we're able to move this stubborn aquatic stone, and Steve can rejoice. But now Steve must face his final task, the biggest rock he has yet seen in this bizarro black grid on a white floor universe he has found himself in. Steve has never been one to turn down a challenge, and you tell the DM that this rock is getting moved. Your Dungeon Master says this newfound struggle will be a difficulty 5 test, and he doubts sincerely that you can move something like this. It's perhaps sort of generous of him to say it's only a difficulty 5, to be honest. Look at that thing. You've probably come to a realization, however, even if we get 1s on both of our d20s, we can't move the stone. So, what can you do? Well, do you remember earlier when we got that extra success on the first stone? In Conan, when we generate extra successes in the field, we can get a resource to share with our entire group called momentum. Momentum is great, as it sort of reinforces mechanically how a group can get into sort of a groove and start to smash through some obstacles easier. It's a positive feedback loop. The more win, the more good you get. Since we have 1 momentum from our 1 success, we can spend that 1 momentum to get an extra d20 on our skill check. And this can be tremendously helpful in a pinch, and I really feel like this mechanic is often sort of misunderstood by critics of the game. Enter your friend, the Magi Vondar. He gained the group some momentum earlier while he was investigating the ruins leading into this white void realm. We can utilize some of this momentum generated from earlier in this skill check, if there's any left by now. So let's spend an additional 2 momentum, meaning 3 momentum total, since Steve really has to move this rock. We're going to roll 5 dice, and bad luck, Steve, you can't win them all. Vondar tries to use the secret scrolls he found, spending some momentum for some extra d20s. The DM declares a difficulty 2 challenge, but Vondar justifies this extra momentum spend with the idea that he can easily earn it back by rolling more than 2 successes. Everyone agrees and he rolls. Vondar's a smart guy, and after adding his skill to this attribute, he only needs to roll a 15 to get a success. So we have 2 successes. Vondar reads the scrolls successfully and the party cheers, but then your Dungeon Master points to that 20 Vondar rolled on the table. Aha, he says. When a 20 is rolled, a complication occurs. A complication is anything that reframes your current situation into a more interesting or a different situation where you have to kind of rethink what's going on. The Dungeon Master was hoping for this, and he's already come up with a plan for this ahead of time. This is sort of not required for you people worried about this, but he knew that something like this might happen. The DM informs everyone that while yes, the scrolls could open a way out, they will not be able to control where they arrive back in their own world, and maybe not even when. Now that's a complication. I also wanted to just take a moment here to really show off some of the work here of Gerald Brom. Gerald Brom is this incredible fantasy artist. You've seen some of his work, or some perhaps work inspired by his work, in things like Diablo, Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, and of course many, many other things. In fact, this entire book is chock full of this beautiful art, great contrasting text, and exquisite bookcraft. I mean, look at some of this stuff. Unlike RPGs that are more in the public consciousness, Conan itself is a skill-based RPG, as opposed to a level-based RPG. In Dungeons & Dragons, for example, whenever you get so much XP, you reach a new tier of power. Whereas in Conan, you spend your XP in order to increase your skills and attributes, as well as get some perks over time. In character creation, you start off by picking an archetype, which is sort of like your character class, but a little bit less rigid. In fact, for me, that's one of the beauties of Conan. You can really sort of make any character you want. And you're not even going to need 30 homebrew supplement classes. When you buy Conan, you're not just buying a cheap little RPG book. Although, cheap is one of the perks of buying Conan. It's only like $40 for the hardcover. When you get this tome, you're looking at a 400-page manuscript with hardcover, full-color pages, and a nice thick, glossy paper. While we just sort of scratched the surface on the mechanics, I can assure you there's a lot more depth involved if you're willing to dig deeper. Conan offers things like hit location-based armor points, and weapon lengths actually affecting combat, zone-based movement, which is, believe me, a lot easier than it sounds, as well as some more advanced combat mechanics that you might find in other games like RuneQuest, such as special effect tables. I would love specifically to talk about the magic system of this game. Suffice it to say that the magic system itself is a lot more amorphous than what you would expect from Dungeons & Dragons, where your spells act as sort of very specific abilities. A spell in Conan can actually be adapted to be used multiple ways, and you usually spend momentum to do it. Magical crafting is also included in this game. Suffice it to say that I do think that it's worth it. Conan is not without some of its faults, however. For example, one of the chief complaints that I have heard with this system is that the Doom system, which is sort of the opposite of the momentum system, and it's used the same way, but for the bad guys, creates a sort of adversarial environment, and I can't help but totally disagree with this. No matter what system you get, you're going to get a dungeon master or a group leader that totally abuses the rules and becomes sort of a tyrant. And I don't think that Conan is any more prone to this than any other system. One of the things that I don't like about Conan are the ranged weapons rules when it comes to how far you can actually fire. In Conan, weapons have certain ranges that are determined by how many zones they can fire through. As a quick note, zones are just little blobby areas that you can use to move around and engage with the environment and engage with enemies just like you would with the grid or with an inch-based system. But it's a little bit more vague. A good example of a zone might be a clearing and in a forest, and the kind of north part of the forest is maybe another zone, and maybe on the other end of the river is a zone, and maybe the bridge on the river is a zone itself. But you can see what I mean by these zones being wildly different in scale depending on which kind of zone it is. This means depending on which zones your archer is firing through, the range of your weapon could be either 100 feet, 1,000 feet, or 10 feet. As a game master myself, I've decided that my table is simply too small to worry about range that much, and if my archers can see you, they can hit you. That goes for the players as well. I'm only going to worry about range whenever we're in a huge area, and that's pretty rare, considering I'm a dungeon crawly type DM. Another issue that I have with the book itself as a product is that it's not terribly well organized. Sure, you have your table of contents, but the momentum rules themselves are split up between multiple sections. There's an overview on page 101. There's momentum specifically in action scenes as described in chapter 5. And while I did actually find a useful chart that kind of gives a whole bunch of examples of momentum, it's disjointed from this other section of the book around page 101 that gives you some more examples. An issue that some new game masters and new players might find is that because you have the ability to control what your character is good at immediately, it may be tempting to make your character hyper specialized. It wasn't long before my players found out that they could make a warrior that only needs a 17 to get a success in melee fighting. This could be a scary concept to the new game master or even new players, but I feel like I should remind new game masters as well as new players that being very good at one thing is not necessarily a good idea in a sword and sorcery concept. For example, the second I want to put pressure on this player who has an exceptionally strong character, all I have to do is move the goal from just smashing everyone with your sword to literally anything else, and suddenly their character is going to feel pretty pointless. Now, it's not our job as game masters to make a character feel pointless, but when a character is less useful themselves, it requires people to work together a little bit more. One thing you could do, for example, is make the objective to protect a certain player. Maybe the bad guys are after him for a reason. It could be fun to cut through a swathe of weak enemies, trying to go after your friend, but the second the archers become visible on the balcony above, he's going to be sweating. One other thing that the book doesn't make perfectly clear in an overt way, but is sort of implied, weapons and shields have things called qualities. Weapons sometimes have the parrying quality, shields sometimes have the shield quality. They mean the same thing, but shield can be used against ranged weapons as well. All these mean is that whenever it's not your turn and you're attacked, if you have the parrying quality on your weapon, or the shield quality on your shield, you may attempt to block the attack for free without accumulating the bad version of momentum called Doom, which of course can be used by the enemies in place of momentum. Another thing that I like about this game is that the currency system is very vague on purpose. Conan the Barbarian was always the kind of character who would get super rich super fast and then lose it all in the next book. The game works kind of the same way. There's even a whole mechanic around what you do between adventures called carousing, and it's a good way for you to go broke and have some great stories come out of it. Some people are worried that losing all of your funds might make you feel a little bit like you've been cheated. In my mind, the way it works is once money is no longer the focal point of your adventure and accumulating it sort of becomes not entirely necessary, the focus of the game can move from money, as it is in some games, to creating a good story, having fun with your friends, and just being a freaking badass. This product is heavy, thick, and extensive, and contains everything you need to play. You aren't going to need a monster manual, a player's guide, or a game master's guide, just this one book. At 368 pages, full color, and thick paper, I'm proud that I own this book on my shelf. There's only one other RPG book in my collection that competes in quality, and that's the Hackmaster 5th edition Encyclopedia of Beasts. If you're like me, then you're also going to value the lore and the visual art of this manuscript, not to mention this layout and formatting. You're getting monsters, NPCs, famous characters, realms, kingdoms, lore, game master advice, and even a full-fledged adventure in between two hard covers. And that is rare in the RPG circuit nowadays. However, there are some things that make this text difficult to use as a reference point. It's not easy in the middle of a session to just flip the book open to recheck some of these rules. The book does repeat some information in sections, like adding a bit about initiative that the Game Master needs to know to the NPC section as well as the initiative section. But there's also sections like the aforementioned momentum spins. The talents you gain from choosing your home country as well as your backstory are not repeated in the talents section. Is this a deal breaker? I don't personally think so. Keep in mind that this book has 368 pages. It's closer to 440 if you're looking at the PDF and if you count things like the back art and indexes. Also, this complaint is much more true of the Quick Start Guide. Also, this complaint is a lot more true about the Quick Start Guide, which is available for free on the internet, by the way. If you still aren't convinced that this complaint is only a minor one, you may change your mind knowing that there is a section near the very back of the book that includes many of the necessary tables and flowcharts that help mitigate the book flipping issue. Being able to raise attributes individually with experience as well as buy talents in that way really enables you to make the exact type of adventurer you want. Players from Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest backgrounds will find much kinship with Conan players, without the negatives that come along with D100 systems. Conan character sheets display this quite well, with the same or more room for customization available to players without 30 separate skills with equations tied to derive stats. I'm looking at you, RuneQuest. Modiphious at this time also has a free character builder app that makes introducing new players to Conan fairly easy. Just try to make your characters together so that questions about how things work, what is useful, and what everyone is actually bringing to the table can be cooperatively answered. The nature of this control granted to new players is perhaps a chance for abuse, so make sure that you and your friends are very clear on what you want from your game, and you can work together on making a group that has unique characters that all have a niche, without becoming too specialized to be useful outside of this niche. Nobody wants to be standing around doing nothing while somebody else trivializes the situation. You know who you are. The core yin and yang of this system is the momentum and doom dichotomy. This sort of design speaks to our subconscious in a way that likely appeals to those interested in proto-psychology and tense, dramatic encounters. Momentum lets overkill turn into a useful strategy, and having built up these points over an adventure allows the flamboyant sword and sorcery characters to attempt feats worthy of legend a little bit more confidently. It wouldn't be Conan without this flair for the dramatic, and we not only get that from these momentum spins, but from its opposite, the doom system. That allows the Game Master to quantifiably adjust the game in a way that is more transparent than typical fiat. No more let it be so arbitrary decisions, as players can clearly and visibly see the economy of power leaning towards the darkness of the evil monsters or the light of the righteous heroes. Bravery wanes when the party knows their failures have stacked the doom in the Dark Lord's favor. The downside of these systems is that players reward each other for their successes and punish each other for their mistakes. When one character generates doom, the Game Master needn't spend that doom on the player that generated it. Additionally, having resources that sway the game in a particular group's favor might spawn rivalries. My advice to those concerned about this is to make sure that everyone involved has a clear understanding that it's the party's momentum and it's the monster's doom, not necessarily the player's momentum and the Game Master's doom. That is where the fundamental issue seems to be coming from. If everyone is there to just drink beer, eat junk food, and have a good time while crafting a great story, you got nothing to worry about. Combat is glorious, gory, and detailed. When your characters are caught off guard, every advantage your long weapon has turned against you when the enemy has a dagger up to your throat. Zones make movement literally less gridlocked, and every weapon has an interesting function unique to itself. Curved swords generally do better on horseback, armor reduces damage rather than making it harder to be hit, wounds are quantified rather than amorphous, and what you wear on each location of your body has a mechanical effect. The downside of this detail is its learning curve. Sure, it's easy to get stuck in and just do a little bit of basic combat, but to master combat, players and game masters both have to understand more than just the fundamentals. There are 2 health bars to keep track in this game. 2, that's mental and physical. Formation rules can make hordes of weak enemies terrifying, and archers utilize volleys of ammunition rather than keeping track of individual shots. Complications can be a little bit hard to invent without some practice, and more complex mechanics like running a mercenary organization, ship combat, and the like are relegated to their own supplement books. Do not be daunted, however. Just like chess, this complexity is deeper in the game, and much can be done without even worrying about it. If you're new to game mastering or dungeon mastering in general and a complex rule situation arises that is beyond your scope, make up something cool that works for everyone and everyone agrees is fair. This complexity is the beauty of sophisticated games, but unlike trading card games, this complexity is not the gatekeeper for you having a good time. Modiphious has done an excellent job of trimming the fat, cutting the bean counting, and really boiling it down to the meat and potatoes of what makes their game great. And now I'm hungry. Ultimately, I would wholeheartedly recommend Conan to anyone who is interested in role-playing, period. It isn't for everyone, but nothing is for everyone. Get yourself a copy, sit down with some cool dudes or lady dudes, and roll some friggin' dice. If you want to see how I made some of those cool dungeon tiles, jungle grasses, or if you want to see me make something new, comment it down below. I also got dungeon maps and physical props I wouldn't mind showing off. Catch you later.